Before we move on to the last stage of our application, our profile page, I want to talk about one quirk that you might have already experienced when it comes to using multiple users within our app. So at the moment, I'm signed in with this user Reed. I'm going to sign out, and I'll log in with a different user. And once I do, we see up at the top that it still clearly says Reed. Now this highlights a key behavior of our Apollo cache. When possible, when Apollo has some data cached for a given query, it's going to try to use it if it has it available. It's going to try to serve data from the cache instead of having to make another network request. And this is an attempt to make our applications as performant as possible. You'll see, in fact, if we take a look at our root query, if we look at our me user type, that it still contains our old user Reed's information. So as we mentioned earlier, in order to manually update our cache, we can just refresh the page, and now we can see our new user. So now we need to address what's the way to resolve issues regarding our cache and queries. Up until this point, we've just covered how to update the cache upon executing a mutation. Well, let's head back to where we're executing our me query, and I believe that's all the way back in root. And the query component doesn't come with an update function. Instead, it comes with a prop that tells Apollo client where to look for data to resolve a given query. It tells it to either look in our local cache or to make a new network request. When we sign out, we're not removing the user data. If we take a look at auth sign out, we see that we're just removing the auth token and setting isLoggedIn to false in our client state. We're not getting rid of our user in the cache. So if we log in with a different user, it's going to load the cached user. So we can fix this behavior simply by changing the fetch policy on our me query. In particular, we can use the cache and network policy. What cache and network does is it tries to resolve the query from the cache, but it also sends a network request to get the latest data. So if our data changes, as is the case when we log in with a different user, our cache is going to be updated from that network request that's being made. And cache and network also means that if there's no data within our cache, for example, we're loading the app for the first time or signing in for the first time, it's just going to send off a network request to get the data that it needs. So now let's save root. And we'll try signing out with a given user and log in with a different one. So I'm going to log back into Reed's account, and we should see Reed's data within our header, and we do. So changing the fetch policy to cache and network clearly worked, and it's worth noting that there's a couple of other fetch policies that we can use that are worthwhile for you to know. Another fetch policy that could have worked, but maybe wouldn't be as performant, is the network only policy. And this means that for a given query, it's always going to send a network request to resolve the query that we put it on. And finally, the last type of policy is no cache. It's similar to network only in that it's always going to send a request, a network request, and as the name implies, it's not going to cache the resulting response. So fetch policy is how we can kind of change the fetching behavior of a given query in relationship to our cache, and to ensure that we serve from the cache when it's possible to, when there's no data changes, as well as get the latest data from the network when it's useful to. We'll set our fetch policy here to cache and network.